Good morning, Bernie. Jeff Flinn from the Bernie Star here on Bernie Brew. Thank you for tuning in this morning. It's been a cold one this week. We had that chill on Thursday and Friday. This is pre-recorded, so we are anticipating the chill, and this morning we felt it. We know it's not a warm period. Stay warm, Bernie. Get out and do what you got to do, and make sure your pets and your cats and your dogs and your animals are all taken care of, because we're still going to see lower temperatures approaching 30s at the night, if not in the 20s. I don't usually throw titles out, but I'm calling this one Water Good as Gold. Everybody knows Bernie's continuing to grow. As we continue to grow, we've got to put pipes out there and get that water from a water source to that tap or to that faucet or to that sprinkler head. I've got two experts here today going to tell us the rights and wrongs, and they're going to walk us around. I've got from the city, I've got Mike Mann from the city, utilities director, and I've got Ben Eldridge from Cow Creek Groundwater Conservation District. He's here to talk to us about some of the wells and the people on the outskirts of Boerne. But no matter if you live in Boerne, if you live on the outskirts, if you live in Esperanza, or you live out on North Main somewhere, the water is the same. It's crucial. The conservation, we're going to face some times here, or we might be facing some times here down the road, like 2011 and back in the 1950s is when things got really drastic. Guys, I'll throw it open.
I'll jump in real quick. So I'm a director on the board of the Cow Creek Groundwater Conservation Districts. Whatever views I share are mine and not necessarily that of other directors or the district as a whole.
That's the asterisk at the bottom of the page.
Yeah, exactly. I guess I'll preface this discussion by saying that this drought is extremely severe, on par, if not worse, by some estimates than the 1950s drought. That 1950s drought stretched over about 7 years. But when we're talking about just intensity plus the increased use of our water supply, we are looking at a really serious drought here, and it's continuing. It extended throughout the past year. I want to say we went into certain drought restrictions in 2023, July, that we required about a 40% reduction in groundwater use. Now, I say required, that honestly, it's not very enforceable. It's voluntary. Some people, yes, are wasting water left and right on grass, but a lot of well users aren't. So we can't expect them to cut back. People who are filling vanity ponds, and I call it spending water on grass because it is like gold, right? They need to cut that back. And there are some enforcement mechanisms we have that we can use, but at the same time, we really are asking the community to voluntarily do the right thing here, not just for yourselves, but honestly for your neighbors and for local businesses. If we don't work together, we have water issues in the county. That's
right.
Going to be.
And like I said, folks, everybody, you go outside and you spend time walking up and down Main Street during Christmas time, or you go out during the DOS Festival when they had their parade there. You go to the Little League and you talk to anybody for 5 minutes. Pretty soon, somebody's going to mention, wow, do you see how quickly it's growing? Or I remember when Boerne was 3,000 people 25 years ago. If you had water issues when you had 3,000 people, what kind of water issues are you going to have when you're 15 or 20 or 30,000 or whatever the Boerne ISD grow out plan is? Mike, talk about city. What do you guys have for us as far as you've got Canyon Lake,
Boerne City Lake, and groundwater wells, and reclaimed water as a fourth source, if you want to think about it that way. It's not potable,
right,
but it does offset irrigation demand. First of all, I want to echo what Ben said and just state for the record that my opinions are my own. I certainly can't speak for the city council. And I will tell you that when I speak and what I say is going to be from the perspective of the utilities operator. I have day-to-day oversight of the utility, and so the way I see something from the standpoint of the utility operator versus, say, economic development or something could be different. But I will tell you that my broad statement is that, and I mentioned it a little while ago, is that community means different things to different people. And so when you speak to folks and they say, I'm from Boerne, they could mean they're from northern Bexar County. They could mean they're from Fair Oaks. They could go to Boerne schools, or they could have a Boerne zip code, and a relatively small percentage actually live in the city limits. Mm-hmm. And from the city of Boerne's utility standpoint, we only serve within the city limits with some exceptions that are approved by the city council. But a lot of the sentiment that you hear about we don't have enough water is not from city utility customers. It's from community members outside the city. And so when you hear the city council talk about we have enough water until 2070, that's for the area that the city of Boerne Water Utility serves, not the community.
Right.
Now, we do know that we all draw from the same pool of groundwater. Many of us draw from Canyon Lake, and there are controls in place But something that's often misunderstood is that folks don't have a trust for the statement that the city has water for the future, and that's because they don't live in city limits, aren't on the city's utility. There are also other public utilities in the area that don't have the resources that the City of Boerne water utility has. So perspectives vary, and that's really part of the confusion.
And just to double down on that, when I talk about our groundwater supply concerns, that is separate from what the city supply is. The city has Boerne City Lake, it has Canyon Lake, and it has some groundwater, but it is not an onerous user. It's not overusing groundwater. It is not the problem. The problem is that we're facing essentially a death by 1,000 cuts, if you will, situation where, for example, the county is probably 10 to 15% built out approximately. Not everybody is on well water, of course, but even those few that are, we're still drawing the water table down. And one of the things that we use for planning in the region, and we work with other groundwater districts in our aquifer on, is a group called the Groundwater Management Area 9. And anyways, we work on setting what we call desired future conditions, a DFC, a desired future condition. And it's not that we really want to see the water drawn down to a certain level, but it's a level that we want to maintain. And we decided as a district that our level would be about 30 feet of drawdown of the aquifer. And in this drought, at this point, we're at 28 feet.
Wow.
So we have 2 feet left of drawdown. And this is across the whole area. Some areas are going to already be drawn down further. Others have a lot of water still left in them. But as an average, we're nearing that 30-foot point. So when I talk about that, though, I'm talking about the county. I'm talking about the groundwater supply. I'm not talking about Boerne's water context, which is radically different because of their supply from GBRA.
Right.
I had a discussion with a young lady one day, and she was asking me about the lake and why is the lake so important, whether it be Boerne City Lake or Canyon Lake, and she was a proponent of rainwater catchment. And I said, so am I, because that's what both lakes are. Essentially, they're community-scale rainwater catchment systems. That water is collected when it rains. It evaporates, but it sits in the lake waiting to be consumed. It has to be treated. That's no different than any other rainwater catchment. And from our utility standpoint, typically we serve about 66% of our water out of rainwater catchment. Last year it was 75%. Wow. We actually consumed a little too small amount of groundwater from a water quality standpoint last year, and I could get into that with charts and an easel. But long story short, one of the challenges that a public water utility that has a distribution system faces is we have to keep that water fresh, and it has to be an ample enough supply for firefighting. So we have to have oversized tanks and oversized pipes so that when the fire department hooks up, they've got a flow. That water has to be replaced. And so do we need consumption? We do. But we never want our consumption to outpace supply, and so it's a delicate balance. People say if we have enough water for 50 years, why are we on restrictions? And the answer is because we don't have enough water for everybody to water their yard copiously in copious amounts in the middle of a drought. So it's about reasonable usage.
But Mike Mann's telling us about the city's aspect. He's the utility director for the city. His comments are his own, not the city's. And we got Ben Eldridge here, a director on the board for the Cow Creek Groundwater Conservation District. Same thing. He's here speaking from Ben Eldridge. I'm sure he's got other people on the board that would share his thoughts. The Milan Mahalik paper we both brought today, a great drought measure for what's gone on since, I think it starts 1947, I think it was the first date. Talk about a drought conservation plan. How extensive is a drought conservation plan, and what does it entail? One thing I'm reading here is if things get really bad, we might get to the first pro rata curtailment. Tell me about that. Was that part of the drought?
So Mike said reasonable use does change on how much supply you have, as well as what types of supplies you have. So again, I'm very important that we differentiate. The city has what we sometimes call purple pipe or reuse water that goes to some of the subdivisions and can water turf grass. And that's not necessarily a bad use. It's a reuse of that water. It's not necessarily bad. We can talk a little more about reuse and its potential in the future, but nonetheless, right? Whereas in the county, with well users, we don't have purple pipe water. People have septic systems. And that's not really necessarily recharging the groundwater supply that we use if we're going into the Trinity system. And that's a good thing because you don't want your septic system mingling with your drinking water, of course. Going back to this reasonable use, right now when it comes to the county, we're in severe drought restrictions. We used to have stage 5, now it only goes to stage 4, and we're in stage 4, and we've been in stage 4 for over a year now. That just means that during that stage 4, we've only actually seen it get worse. We've literally, on our charts that we look at every month, there are a number of months that are the worst months we've had on record since we started really managing this supply. And there's some caveats there because it's statistics, but at the same time, the fact is it is not looking very pretty, and we are in a severe scenario where reasonable use is only what you really need to use. Mm-hmm. It's what you need to use to wash your clothes, cook your food, drink water, clean your body, what have you. And fair enough, I know there's some agriculture producers that also have some use for cattle and things, and I'm not going to fault that either. But my point is, this is a time for austerity in our water use. We have got to pull together as a community and be more responsible than we've ever been, because we don't know when this drought lets up. Right. Nobody's got a crystal ball on it. And you can say, well, there's been some patterns in the past, therefore, that's not how the climate works. That is not how we can predict the future. We can only hope.
If we get 1.5 inches or 2 inches of rain, that's going to help the city, but the county is not. Those wells aren't going to build. Those wells aren't going to flush up with 2 inches of rain over 2 days.
Right. So oftentimes we get these rain events that will green up the surface and the plants, the grasses, et cetera. But that's not the same thing as getting a rainfall event that will actually recharge the groundwater. It's called a green drought. So in other words, the surface is nice and green and the subsurface is being depleted. Yeah, the drought of around 2011, that was a very severe drought. We did not see a recovery of the deep soil moisture, the moisture that the trees access. We didn't see a full recovery of that until 2015 when we had the severe floods that some of us recall as the Wimberley floods. Mm-hmm. That's when there was so much water sheeting across the landscape. The hydraulic pressure was pushing water down into the subsurface. The rivers were full. They have fractures in karst recharge areas where water, I call it colander rock. It's that Swiss cheese rock right. That water just flushes through. So when we have a major flood event like that, you have a lot of water going into those areas and recharging our groundwater supply. But you also have so much water falling on the surface that it essentially migrates down into that deep soil moisture area that you want your trees to access. A small rain event will not recharge that, number one. Number two is because it doesn't recharge it, it also increases the risk of wildfire because you have trees that are more dehydrated than they would otherwise be. So even in a green drought, when the grass is green, the trees can still be severely drought stressed, and therefore they can be more susceptible to wildfire.
And that grass that grows then becomes part of the fuel that feeds the fire.
That's
right. After it dries out. Yeah, and so echoing again what Ben said a minute ago, when it comes to beneficial use, I call it water for basic human needs, cooking, cleaning, bathing. There's also the non-residential uses for schools and hospitals and all those waters that get used, restaurants for cooking and those kind of things. Those are things that I would call the base flow for our utility. And when we talk about having sufficient water, that's what we're really talking about. I often advise the city council that we have all the water we can need available to us for basic human needs. What right. we are short of is water for copious amounts of irrigation in the middle of a drought. And that's why we have restrictions.
Just this past, I joked that it seems like it was 3 weeks ago, it was probably 3 months ago when the city council had its fee adoption for the water rates. And I'm still astounded. They broke it down by water users from up to 5 or 10,000, 10 to 25, 25, 50 to 100,000. There are 6 users in Boerne, in the city, 6 users of 50 to 100,000 gallons a month, and 2 people use over 100,000 gallons of water a month. I live in Converse, the other side of San Antonio. I get my SAWS water statement every quarter. It says you're 87% best users in your size. I'm like, what are people using water for? Because I do basic shower, wash dishes, that kind of thing. Water the yard once every 2 or 3 weeks when it needs it, when it's dying. I set my Alexa, let me know when it's 35 minutes so I can go out and shut off my water. Alexa keeps me in line so I don't fall asleep and keep watering for 7 hours and water's flowing down the street, wastewater. But I was just astounded by somebody using 100,000 gallons of water a month.
You spoke about the weather a little earlier, and the winter storm that we had, I think it was 21. I block it just psychologically. I need to because that was a bad time. But weather events remind us that we are not as prepared as we used to be. And before there were public utilities, whether they be electric, natural gas, water, that made those things readily available and relatively inexpensive, people worried about where their water came from. They had to haul it in from a well, let's say. They had to go draw it out of it with a bucket, and so they just didn't waste. And we're all part of this now. We're used to turning on the water to brush our teeth. Do we turn it off or not? If you were drawing your water out of a bucket, I bet you would. You wouldn't waste it, but when you can just leave the faucet on, you do. And so we've been conditioned to not think about how important it is because it seems readily available. And when you talk about the price, even with the rate increase, it's still very inexpensive. I mean, look at what a gallon of water costs at the grocery store versus what 1,000 gallons of water costs when you get it through a meter. And it's relatively inexpensive. And part of the reason that we don't use it as judiciously as we could is we're conditioned to it being readily available.
Right.
And when it's not, it's a surprise.
Well, when people get concerned about water, I'm breaking this down very basic, it's when they drive down River Road and the river's down, they're like, wow, where's all the water? We're using all the water. That's not a good example, but that's what gets people's attention is when they see rocks instead of water. Instead of ducks, they see mud. That got people's attention.
So Mike was referencing the old trope about running water while you're brushing your teeth, and that's classic, and I'm not faulting it. I want to say, though, that's not where most of our water gets wasted, of course. I know he knows that for sure. It mostly gets wasted on landscaping. So when you're looking at your neighbors and you're going, where the heck is that water going? Somewhere in there, they're probably doing something either landscaping-wise, or maybe they even have leaky toilets, which is a major issue from a standpoint of water loss, leaky toilets, honestly, because it hides and it just leaks away.
Right.
But the point is that we need to make sure that we knock out those big water waste components. And in this case, it's landscaping. Now, landscaping does not have to be a water hog. You can adopt native plants that are more adapted to our region, and thereby they have deeper root systems, and they're more resilient to drought. And most of them, weather a drought. Even if you have to give them water, you only have to give them a little bit of water to sustain them. You don't have to drown them like you would, say, I don't know, a St. Augustine grass or something that just is not meant for this climate.
Yeah, and it's probably not very realistic to think that everybody's going to go with a native landscaping lawn. They come from other areas, maybe areas that aren't so arid. And so quality of life is what it is, and people's perspectives vary. However, even if you have a thirsty lawn, you can train it to use less. I personally have been watering my lawn once a week since 2002, and it thrives, even in a drought. A little bit of water.
What's your trick?
The main things I do, water heavily on one day, heavily being all of the water for that week on one day, and I mow it long, and I mulch.
Leave it high, mulch, and then when you're watering it one day, you're also getting those roots to reach deeper.
Correct.
Yeah.
People want to mow their yards like a golf course, and all that does is expose the root system. And when it's 102 degrees, you're burning your roots if you're cutting your grass.
You're increasing the evaporative loss from the soil surface.
Right.
So if more of us do that, and let's just say that more of us do that and we use 10% less water as a community, that's huge. That's big. Our reclaimed water that Ben spoke of, our total water supply, even though it's only available in a small part of our service territory, it last year accounted for 15% of our total water usage. So that means that 15% of the potable water we would have used became reclaimed water, and therefore we saved 15% of the water.
How extensive is the reclaimed system, the purple pipe? How is it stretched? When new subdivisions coming in, is there an effort to made, or is it graphed out? What would it take to get purple pipe to them?
Yeah, so it was created, our reclaimed water system, I won't even go into how it started, but the idea was hatched as part of the Esperanza development, WCID number 2. They paid for the majority of the infrastructure going in, and 100% of their automated landscape irrigation in that development is reclaimed water. They essentially have no potable water irrigation peak. They use the basic needs water 365 days a year because all of their landscape irrigation is from reclaimed water. It has since been expanded into the Ranches at Creekside neighborhood, and in the future, as the availability increases, as our flows into the plants that get treated increase, then we'll be able to spread it out to other areas, maybe even parks, athletic fields, things like that. But there is a supply versus demand issue, and so as we increase our treatment from the plant that produces that, then we'll be able to distribute it to more areas. That is a potable water savings.
Right.
But again, only available in our service territory.
Right. That's Mike Mann. You're hearing folks talking about, he's from the city of Boerne. He's with the utilities director, talking about water within the city. Outside the city, I've got Ben Eldridge here from Cow Creek Groundwater Conservation District talking about our people on wells. I think there's 43 wells you measure on. Is that correct?
The monitoring network is rather extensive, and I don't recall the exact number myself.
So and the wells, we get a couple inches of rain, everything turns green for 3 or 4 days. Boerne Lake comes up a little bit, the river comes up a little bit, you'll see the ducks out there, but the wells are slower to respond. Can you talk about, Ben, tell us a little bit about why that is. When they're drawing water from the different water sources, below ground. Are they coming from the Trinity? Are they coming from the Wilcox?
Overwhelming majority of the wells go into the Trinity. They go into the middle Trinity. Some of them go into what's called the lower Trinity. The lower Trinity is almost being mined. It does not recover very well, and it's getting drawn down a fair amount. But the middle Trinity does get some decent recovery. And yeah, so these are just basically geologic strata, right? So in other words, you have basically an area where you can have what's called saturated thickness, meaning there's a lot of water that can be held in this geologic sort of, if you will. And then below it is a geologic layer that water will not migrate through very effectively. So there still can be some interaction between the two aquifers, but so it's not quite like necessarily saying it's a sealed, say, swimming pool or something. Let's call it a swimming pool with maybe a little bit of cracks in it that just lets a little bit of water move between the systems.
Mike Mann, tell me, how much water does Boerne use in a day?
Oh boy. Right now, our basic human needs use is about 2 million gallons a day.
Wow, 2 million gallons. What's the majority come from canyon, or is majority lake, or?
So the way we manage our resources is that about 1.9 to 2 million gallons a day is what we buy from Canyon Lake. And we produce our peak or our extra needs water from a combination of groundwater wells and Boerne City Lake and reclaimed water. Okay. But from the potable standpoint, it's Cow Creek wells and Boerne City Lake. And that is, majority of that is from Boerne City Lake.
2 million gallons a day. What would that have been 10 years ago?
Boy, I don't even want to maybe half of that, a little more. And what you generally see is you see about 60 to 70 gallons per person per day is a good average for basic human needs. Add commercial on top of that, it equates to about 100 gallons per person per day. And so it follows the population. But again, that's the service population on our utility. From the area that is the community of Boerne, that's the resources that Ben is talking about that's slower to recover. They don't have access to City of Boerne lake water. They don't have access to the Canyon Lake water. They only have their wells or rainwater catchment that they put in themselves. Very difficult to do, very expensive to maintain. That's why our customers have our utility doing it, because as an individual, that's tough to manage.
I think I do want to put a plug in, though, for conservation for our whole community, because while I know you guys have a great supply out of GBRA, the Canyon Lake water, Canyon Lake does suffer from drought impacts. It has a number of additional straws into it. And we're also relying on everyone to be both good actors as well as Canyon Lake, GBRA, to be good managers of that water supply, meaning impose restrictions when it's appropriate, when the lake hits certain levels. And they can do that. But again, when we're talking about drought stress, the drought of the 50s is what's used as the measure for how severe drought can get. We have tree ring studies from the 1800s that indicate far worse droughts. And so we need to be mindful that we have not seen the worst drought, and we may or may not during our lifetimes, but we need to still have a conservation mindset around what you could describe as a gold-like resource. We cannot survive without this resource, and so we need to have a conservation mindset to maintain it.
Couldn't agree more. The more that we can individually save water, the better we do for the community.
How do we get that across to people?
We have radio interviews featuring Ben Eldridge and Mike Mann, and they double down on emphasizing that water conservation is the best supply of water we can achieve.
I agree. We just communicated at every opportunity and tried to educate folks in the importance of it. I was watching a TV show the other day, and it was all about water, and people in Texas or in the southern United States were fighting over water, and it was a bonanza, and we all know when that was on the air. And it was a show that centered around a land war over water availability. There's movies going back to the 40s. This is not new. Right. We just forget we're not in a drought.
Not only is it not new, but if you look globally at least groundwater supplies, we are seeing severe depletions. And I do want to put a plug in for the reality that I don't think our district is equipped with adequate authority to manage the supply. Our job is, honestly, as I see it, is to protect the private property right of accessing water, but there's no private property right to protect if through a death of 1,000 cuts we run out of water. And when I say death from 1,000 cuts, if a well goes in on an acreage at this point it's over 10 acres or more, they're an exempt well, and we have no authority over that. Now, don't get me wrong, it's not that I want more authority for the sake of authority, it's merely to manage the supply, and my concern is the more we see these exempt wells go in, the more that we are at risk of running out of a water supply, because we are truly in a priority groundwater management area. It's a priority groundwater management area, not because somebody just decided to name it that. It's because we have such a shortage of supply. Mm-hmm. So I think the legislature is going to need to equip groundwater districts in the priority groundwater management area with more authority.
Water is finite.
To protect this so-called private property right so that it can be a private property right.
Yeah, and it goes farther than just the amount of water that one's available to withdraw from the ground. As water levels in the ground deplete, then the spring flows stop, and the spring flow is what keeps lake levels up. And so lakes refill on flood events, of course they do, but it's that continued spring flow in the normal years that keeps the lake full when it's not flooding. And when the groundwater is depleted, that spring flow slows.
Did you say on a normal year?
There is no normal. It's either really wet or really dry.
Well, that's the thing about the hill country, right? We say that it's a drought-prone region punctuated by flood events.
Right. How do people get a hold of you at Cow Creek if they have questions? Where do they ship it to?
Maybe look me up on Facebook, or I work at the Cibolo Conservancy Land Trust, and you can look online and find our website and go to my email through there. It's b.eldridge@ciboloconservancy.org.
And Mike Mann, when people have questions about, we want to have you come out and have somebody from the city come out and speak to our group about water conservation. How do they get a hold of somebody in the city to do that?
We have a communications director named Chris Shadrock, and he's not an engineer as I am. He's much better spoken than I because of that, much more personable person. Ryan Bass is our natural resources coordinator, also our tree guy. Mm-hmm. Ryan does a lot on conservation. He's in charge of our conservation program. Chris Shadrock at the City of Boerne or Ryan Bass at the City of Boerne would probably be our first contacts.
Folks, water's finite. We don't tend to think when you're brushing your teeth or you're shaving or showering or watering your yard, you don't think that this could run out tomorrow. I could run out of water. Then you think, maybe I shouldn't have run that water. Maybe I shouldn't have I could have watered my yard for half an hour instead of an hour, that kind of thing. So, Mike Mann, thank you for coming in. Ben Eldridge, thanks for coming in. Folks, we're into 2025. Be vigilant. Be mindful of your surroundings, and let's watch our water so when it's 107 degrees in 6 months, we're not watching all this water waste away. So, folks, thank you very much. Have a great Saturday. God bless you, and thank you for tuning in.